The Fourth Authority by Dr. Alon Giladi. Chapter 1. Why the Fourth Authority? Conceptual Framework. Third Gate, from Practical Thought. 6. Due to the absence of a clear institutional solution to the problem of social gaps in an era of the welfare state crisis, in analogy to the economic-political debate between the need for a spontaneous market, according to Hayek, and the aspiration for full employment, according to Keynes. General.
This chapter will be dedicated to the economic-political debate that raged during the 20th century regarding the establishment of the welfare state. I do not pretend to enter the thickness of economic issues in their technical manner, but to present the discussed debate through the opposing political economic outlooks of two of the greatest influential economists of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich August von Hayek. My claim in this chapter will be that the fourth branch is likely to be the response to the fears and reservations arising from the debate in question in relation to the disadvantages and advantages inherent in the liberal democratic economy against the background of the rise and fall of the social democratic welfare state. Keynes's influence on Western economic views and policy during and after the Great Depression of the late 20s and early 30s, and until at least the beginning of the 70s of the 20th century, is beyond doubt. So too is Hayek's influence from the 70s onward. The return to Keynes against the background of instability, such as during a crisis, or the problem of social gaps derived from the neoliberal economy in an era of globalization, teaches of the vitality of the discussion in the thought of these scholars. The liberal economic world was struck with astonishment when Lord Keynes published his book regarding the general theory. But this astonishment was as nothing compared to the suffering and despair that befell the United States, as well as the rest of the world, following the Great Depression of 1929. Keynes sought to pave the way for the state's intervention in a direct manner in the free market, especially in the issue of employment. According to him, classical economic theory, which favored a completely free market devoid of intervention, constituted a specific case of the possibility to achieve economic equilibrium, and focused on two functional components for diagnosing economic processes: interest and money, and in practice ignored an additional and essential component to the equation: employment. Until the general theory, the classical liberal approach prevailed in the West, according to which this equilibrium is achieved through market forces by supply and demand occurring through rational agents and private self-interested parties, while preferring saving over spending, bringing the price level in the economy toward stabilization, devoid of unemployment. However, this model failed in the Great Depression, and in practice did not succeed in acting in a full manner ever. Keynes argued that there is no situation in which zero unemployment exists, and that the factor of employment must be introduced into the equilibrium equation in the economy, while aspiring to maximize it through the state's intervention by means of socialization of investment, including a well-planned policy of public works which will raise the national income. According to him, as long as employment is fuller, greater social economic stability will be enabled for the long term. Keynes's fear was that an economy without governmental intervention increases the gaps between the rich and the poor, since the dividend provided to the working class becomes increasingly scant, while the few capital owners will prefer the enjoyment inherent in accumulating more and more non-productive property until the unavoidable social collapse. Because of this, Keynes saw fit to argue that for the state, as an employer, and as the central body in society capable of producing employment, whether in an exclusive or integrated manner, there is indeed a place for intervention for the purpose of creating an equilibrium, devoid of unemployment, toward growth on the basis of leaving free initiative and competition intact, while distinguishing and preferring industrial capitalism, which invests, creates employment, over financial speculative capitalism, which promotes interest. This action will be done through the creation of public works, semi-autonomous factories, price controls, and a drastic reduction of the dimensions of unemployment through them, and especially through full employment of social economic inequality. This intervention is required both in a state of inflation and certainly in a state of deflation, and in practice in a constant manner at such or another level. Because in a state of full employment, which is not possible in a completely free market, there will be a greater chance to reach a general narrowing of social gaps. Keynes's approach constituted the conceptual ground for the solution of the New Deal in the United States and for the establishment of the democratic welfare state after the Second World War. The general theory from 1936 constituted a challenge to traditional economic liberal theories and opened a door for the state's steered institutional intervention in the free economy, mainly against the background of the problem of unemployment. Although contrary to classical social democracy, Keynes did not propose this intervention for reasons of striving for total equality, and even did not detail how it would be planned. But his ideas regarding possibilities of economic action in the present, for reasons of social justice, were adopted by not a few from the left camp in the free world. One of the piercing and well-known criticisms toward Keynes and toward the welfare state in general was ignited exactly from that same place that was left devoid of exhaustive reference: the question of the meaning, character, and essence of the planning and decision-making by the state intervening in market affairs beyond mere protection of its independent functioning. Keynes believed that the state would need to learn, expect, and coordinate the steps it would take in the field of the economic field, but how this would be done he did not detail in the general theory, except for dedicating these actions to a professional scientific economic rank. As opposed to him, Hayek argued against the welfare state and the state's intervention in the free market, except for the purpose of its existence as it is, for a calm and smooth action of the market, out of an integration of economic and philosophical outlook, both from aspects of efficient functioning and from aspects of aspiration for human liberty and prevention of injury to it. If we desire to live in societies in which economic activity is coordinated with a huge number of people with whom we do not have face-to-face relations, behold, we have no possibility besides use of the mechanism of the market. The spontaneous market enables the passage of information in ways that cannot be performed in coordination by central planning, for it weighs the decisions of all the individuals acting freely in concrete situations in which they act for their own benefit when their awareness of their specific matter is relatively great and small, by contrast, in the general context. To the central authority, there is a much narrower range of decisions, and it has in practice no capacity to know which decision will be good and which bad to such an extent that it is probable it will not be able to receive the suitable decision for a given case. According to Hayek's method, a sufficient level of information will not be enabled for the state authorities for the purpose of correct intervention in determining the state of equilibrium in the economy. To the state acting without a personal interest for personal profit at personal risk, there are a limited number of possibilities and knowledge which are general in their essence, as opposed to the spontaneous economy that balances between all the players acting out of private motivation, interest, and risk. Knowledge limited in a general way, but expanded in a particular way. Beyond that, from a philosophical perspective, there is a close relationship between structural liberty of the citizens and private ownership of capital, between the liberty of the entrepreneur and the state's attempt to plan economic activity even within narrow boundaries. In the early stages, as more time passes, the intervening state will be forced to accumulate more and more means for the purpose of increasing its authoritarian character, for the purpose of operating the welfare state mechanisms with the growth of population, and this will lead in the end of the matter to a totalitarian regime. The starting point of these two scholars was without doubt the liberal need in preservation and in encouragement of free initiative and competition. But Hayek refused to recognize the term social justice, certainly in the need for state intervention in the economy for its sake, since according to his taste and method, market forces are specifically those which enable the existence and progress of a free society, and they are those that will solve the difficulties in society by the possibility of helping the weak in adjustment to the society's enrichment. By contrast, planning from above for reasons of justice and others will lead, as stated, slowly but surely to the collapse of the free society and the development of a dictatorship. The conceptual and practical basis of the fourth authority does not stand in contradiction to Keynes's outlook, but rather in a corrective manner in light of the criticism of the welfare state. The fourth branch is not a factor that intervenes in a direct and exclusive manner, planning the activity of the entire economy from above. The branch constitutes an indirect intervening factor, aspiring to outline a path and means for the purpose of creating a situation of full employment, including the training of workers, education for employment, and direct and corrective aid to the middle and weak class, as well as investment and control of significant occupational industrial initiatives, semi-autonomous or in mixed ownership or in a direct manner by the state. The fourth authority will constitute a complementary institutional factor from that same conceptual technical economic direction of which Keynes speaks, although its being separate from the executive branch will enable balance and checking of trends about which Keynes's opponents spoke. At the conceptual basis of the fourth branch stands a different outlook from that of Hayek, fundamentally different. But the proposed practical solution does not stand in direct contradiction to the basis of his outlook. Hayek, who sought to abolish the concept of social justice, which is carried out in his opinion through the free market, believed that there is a place to be of help to the victims of fate, the weakest in society, and in this cautious language, he even noted that the state has a supervisory and even leading role in this aid, and this without intervening in the activity of the economy as it is, and especially where the economy grows and society becomes wealthy. This is not a central role of the state, but an adjunct to the success of civil society, namely, the market. It is understood that the idea of the fourth authority discussing populations much broader than the victims of fate mentioned by the scholar, and as a central role and not an adjunct, does not stand in one line with this one-sided approach, and I would even say this cruel one. But there is not in its basis a contradiction in the aspect of direct and one-way intervention in the management of the economy about which this scholar complained. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that to the actions of education, investment, and aid, which the branch will be required to perform directly and indirectly, both toward the population for which it was created, and in the aspects of the balancing competition with the executive branch, there will indeed be an influence on the free economy toward the narrowing of gaps standing at its base. If Hayek's will is for competition and market forces, then this competition must be comprehensive and fair, and not a clearly impossible competition. My claim in this chapter will therefore be that the fourth authority constitutes a sort of economic and conceptual middle way, which on the one hand enables indirect and corrective intervention in a specific sector in the free market, an intervention which of course has a general influence especially in the long run, and at the same time leaves the general monetary policy in the hands of the executive branch, acting in a traditional manner according to the rules of the spontaneous market, while competing, checking, and balancing against the fourth branch, acting from aspects of social equality. This claim will also be required to examine the results of intermediate possibilities that were tried in the economies of some of the liberal democratic states, in analogy to the economic political positions of the two scholars, in relation to the problem of social gaps.
Keynes and the point intervention in the unemployment question within the framework of existing institutions.
A primary argument against an attempt at analogy from Keynes's work regarding the fourth branch comes from the direction of his practical proposals, which constitute an integral part of the interpretation of his economic teaching. The times in which Keynes acted are fundamentally different from our own days. Then, the liberal democracy stood perplexed before the fascist regimes on the right and the communist ones on the left, which presented before it a society devoid of unemployment, individuals seemingly devoid of economic worries in exchange for a severe payment of the loss of liberty. The Western society was situated at the end of the 20s and the beginning of the 30s in a severe social crisis, whose most prominent expression received manifestation in the recession and unemployment following the stock market crash in 1929. Keynes's theoretical revolution in classical liberal economics, which paved the way for the state's intervention in the economy's conduct, never came to propose intervention of the kind or level presented in theories from the left or the right. Keynes's claim was part of the Western intellectual response to the rise of totalitarianism and the masses, as well as to the problems that arose in the pure capitalist system. His general correction, like Schumpeter's for democratic theory, Mannheim's for the social sciences, and Popper's for the logic of scientific discovery, all formed part of a liberal intellectual effort to cope with the threat placed before them in theory and in practice. Keynes did not try to correct the philosophical foundations of liberalism, nor its understood institutions, but rather to propose a different approach for action in property relations and liberal institutions, for the solution of a specific problem as a given fact, while adding intervention in certain central and pointed areas as an ad hoc intervention, as distinguished from a long-term and multi-purpose institutional or regimal change toward the capitalist system in a comprehensive manner. Especially, Keynes sought to provide an answer to what appeared in his eyes as the central danger to the regime: unemployment. The intervention of the central bank in lowering or raising interest for the purposes of increasing investments, and from here increasing employment, or initiated works by the government in governmental or semi-governmental companies, but in no way a substantive change in the image of the state or its regime toward action for a sustained duration of the kind of the fourth branch. The answer to this claim comes both from the particular direction and from the general direction. There is no doubt that Keynes was an economist whose foundations were planted in the liberal tradition from which he emerged and which he sought to change without injury to the foundations of the liberal democratic regime as it is. But beyond that, one cannot deny his aspiration to cope with a social practical reality, which required a solution different from the solutions proposed by the economic tradition and which were considered sacred cows in those days, and especially regarding the granting of power in the hands of the state to intervene in the economy's conduct. And all this by means of a professional economic change of the accepted parameters in economic theory toward other independent variables acting on the collective, on the aggregate demand, on the total supply, as distinguished from the individual's interest as it is in individual relations. It cannot be said of Keynes's practical solutions that it does not concern institutions, or that it concerns ad hoc solutions, but rather perhaps that it concerns limited institutions dealing in an economic professional manner with certain issues, in a defined field which is a certain part of the economy's activity, which is conducted as a whole in a free manner. The power placed in the hands of the central bank, the power for initiated works, for the establishment of governmental or semi-governmental companies, are institutions fundamentally different from the pure liberal model, although different from those proposed in this work, and their meaning is the state's intervention in a limited but explicit manner for the solution of that same problem that stood before Keynes's eyes. Those same institutions, certainly their manner of action within the framework placed in this work, are not suitable for the solution of those problems that did not stand before Keynes's eyes. Not to mention that they did not lead to full employment as he desired and aspired. The political and economic reality is indeed fundamentally different in our days. The capitalist society needs a correction for different reasons for different problems, and first and foremost, the problem of social gaps as defined in this work. This problem also includes the subject of unemployment, or alternatively, employment under low conditions, which do not enable self-autonomy, certainly not equality of opportunity, and its solution today, as then, cannot be taken solely from within those mechanisms dependent on the specific case of the market's conduct, namely, the individual's activity alone, which, in the absence of real equal opportunity, cannot be truly free. This problem, therefore, requires a different institutional solution as well as an economic-political approach willing to go outside the ruling conventions toward new solutions which will preserve the liberal democracy but also bring it to a state of correction. As for the particular aspect, behold, the problem of unemployment as it is has not been solved. And those same existing institutions, namely the central bank or the executive branch, were proven as unsuitable, to say the least, for the solution of that same problem for which Keynes was required. Certainly, a broader problem like the problem of social gaps. The central bank acts in a professional manner for the benefit of the ruling layers, and even it, as it is not devoid of severe problems. It is possible to argue that it concerns a specific case in Israel, which does not possess a tradition of public service like in Britain, for example, but it is not known to me, and in any case, it is contrary to the basic assumptions of this work, that the trend in Israel toward the expansion of gaps skipped over Britain and the rest of the liberal democratic world, even in an era of a seemingly labor government. Beyond that, the solutions of the executive branches to the unemployment problem do not fit Keynes's teaching at all, but rather the neoliberal teaching, namely, the cessation of support for the unemployed and throwing them to the free market for work at starvation wages. A matter which not only did not abolish unemployment, but added more and more exploited and embittered populations. It is evident that even the pointed matter for which Keynes was required, with its broader and contemporary implications, requires a different institutional solution, on the basis of that which exists, which on the one hand will preserve Keynes's aspiration for the preservation of the liberal democratic regime, but also will provide a possible answer to the built-in problems of the ruling capitalist economy. The fourth branch seeks to provide a different institutional response to a different problem in a different reality, from a historical social-economic perspective. For the achievement of that same equilibrium in the economy in which unemployment will be reduced to a minimum, but this under conditions of livelihood that will enable a respectable and worthy civic autonomy. This goal can only be achieved by an integrated action between the state and civil society, in a manner in which equal, balanced, and checking power will be given to the seemingly contradictory trends so that they shall complement each other. The analogy to Keynes's method is dual. On the general level, it concerns a response within the democratic liberal framework without a radical change of the type of messages with which Keynes coped, as well as without injury to private initiative and the free market. On the other hand, it has in it the capacity for the state's intervention in the markets and society's conduct in a manner different from that which existed until now, and did not prove itself in the aspects of the problem in question, as well as a call for a different thought toward the state and civil society, and toward the integrated relations between them, as well as a demand to the economic theorists to give their mind to solutions different from the existing neoliberal dogma in the nature of a specific case of the democratic liberal regime, as opposed to a more general, comprehensive, and balanced possibility. As for the particular level, a new mechanism is proposed here which will have a direct and especially indirect influence regarding equality of opportunity in employment in the democratic liberal society, as well as the provision of employment in an initiated manner, which will be supervised by the executive branch, and all this through education, occupational training, encouragement of the development of different economic theories within the framework of the liberal democratic society, support and promotion of initiated enterprises, in initiated governmental public works, as well as in semi-governmental enterprises, mainly possessing public aspects, in a manner that will not violate but rather contribute to the balance of the economy in full and worthy employment. Furthermore, the requested mutual action between the executive branch and the social branch will not enable the monetary as well as the fiscal as well as the social institutions to perform a one-sided policy for the sake of or under the decisive influence of such or another sector, at the expense of the entire public.
Keynes and the economic professional intervention.
Keynes's enterprise is first and foremost economic professional. His conclusions, as well as his proposals, rely on theoretical professional economic analyses. The intervention in the economy's conduct toward full employment through investment and initiated works shall be a purely professional intervention, and not one relying on considerations of choice and satisfying the whims of the masses. The monetary and fiscal intervention ought to be performed by an economic professional mechanism of the public service, and not by politicians motivated by other considerations. This aspiration of his seemingly contradicts the proposal discussed here, insofar as the fourth branch is both elected and legislative, and therefore a fear exists that it will act in a populist manner which will seek to satisfy its voters, all the more so that it will constitute a sort of return to the economy planned by politicians, which did not succeed. To this claim, it is worthy to respond in two. First and foremost, when the professional intervention is performed according to fixed conceptions, for example, anti-Keynesian, behold, it is likely not to lead to the desired results, even if it exists as a mechanism, exactly in a parallel manner to its action, according to fixed Keynesian conceptions. To this, it can be answered that there is a difference between professionalization for the purpose of protecting the free activity of the economy and professionalization for the purpose of intervention in the economy's activity. By contrast, it can be argued that that same activity of professionals has not in it enough to bring about free participation in that same market activity which is free only apparently, unless these and those are situated in separate and independent bodies within the framework of the state. Second, those same professionals, whether in the Treasury, whether in the central bank, whether in the governmental or semi-governmental companies, are not devoid of political and personal interests as they are. And should there be no mechanism which will balance their action, behold, it is likely to be channeled in one direction, and different from that toward which Keynes aspired, as is argued in this work. Furthermore, this trend cannot change significantly in a reality in which society and its mechanisms are controlled by capital owners in a liberal democratic manner, unless there be an opposing, balancing, and checking institution that will encourage the change in its theoretical, practical, and professional aspects. Such an institution in the democratic society, as distinguished from academic or protest institutions, or from non-democratic trends, must draw its power and authority from the public and be assisted simultaneously by professionals for the purpose of performing its goals properly.
Keynes, the welfare state, and the fourth authority.
The reaction to the opening that Keynes created in the dogmatic economic theory of his days, as well as in its application regarding the government's action in the democratic liberal society, paved the conceptual path in Europe toward the establishment of the welfare state, and in the United States toward the New Deal policy. A combination of the central bank's action with initiated works, United States, or of this activity with the nationalization of essential services, economic and social in Europe, signaled a new era, different from the one that preceded it. Once a theoretical possibility was placed before the problems of the hour to deviate from the built-in conceptual limitations in the adherence to the individual economic case for the purpose of drawing comprehensive conclusions for economic action. This era was and is no more due to its economic failure and due to technological global development. Today we are situated in a fundamentally different period in which the state sheds from itself more and more institutions, including those that were outside the free market in the days when the old doctrine ruled, such as social services, prisons, etc. All the more so the governmental and semi-governmental ones. And from here, that there is no place for a return to an era that was, and is no more, in the image of the fourth authority. But Keynes did not act nor conceive the welfare state as it is, and his theory does not possess socialist goals for their own sake. The conclusions derived from his economic thought toward the nationalization of the central bank, a national investment bureau with authorities to propose private and public loans, and an active monetary and fiscal policy to guarantee full employment and thereby increasing effective demand and economy activity, are not derived from the motives of the social democrats at the base of the welfare state, namely, interclass struggle, equality as a political or moral goal. Keynes believed in a state of equality of opportunity, but thought that this already existed in his time, and that after the solution to the employment problem, which stood before his eyes as a danger to the Western regime, it is seemingly possible to return to the market economy in its regular character. The social democratic welfare state was not the fruit of Keynes's thought, but perhaps a combination between socialist views and his ideas, and the intervening mechanisms derived from them. The fourth branch as a solution to the disappearance and failure of the welfare state is different from the direction of Keynes's thought, both in the sense that it is a thought coming to preserve the system while solving a specific problem, and not a built-in and general problem as is the goal of the fourth branch, and because of the extensive institutions it proposes compared to the pointed proposals of Keynes. To this claim, it is worthy to respond first that the fourth authority does not come to change the system toward an opposite direction, but to correct it toward a balanced direction through competition with existing institutions within a framework that has in it the capacity to limit the power of these and those alike. But beyond that, it is clear that Keynes saw in pure capitalism a historical stage and not a permanent reality. The aspiration for full employment is a specific aspiration, but it has general implications without a doubt. For example, regarding motivations in the economy, the aversion to monetary motivation as it is, the desire to encourage initiative that has general utility by its side, the aspiration to increase motivation in the public service in combination with capitalist entrepreneurship. Its logic and success are in the combination of collective and individual action within the democratic liberal framework, and this without harming property rights, free competition, liberty, in a manner in which the branch's action will not be of the type of central planning combined with all society ownership of the means of production, but of a moderate type, of indirect planning and intervention as much as possible in all the economy's affairs as they are, as distinguished from social affairs in which its influence will be direct but supervised in the overall balance of branches. According to Keynes's view, we must separate between those services that are individual in their essence and those that are social. Namely, the state's agenda should be in relation to those functions in which the decisions are not made by anyone if the state will not do them, namely, to avoid doing those things that the individuals are already doing, compared to those that are not done at all in the present. In this view of Keynes, there is seemingly no contradiction to the proposed mechanism of the fourth authority, whether we see it in a specific manner or from a general point of view on society, whether it concerns indirect intervention in economic planes, for example, by education and professional training, initiated works, investments in the weak sectors, or direct intervention in social planes. In all these fields of action, for minimum social conditions and the strengthening of the middle classes and the weak classes, not by direct intervention in the free market, it does not concern actions done by the individuals as they are, who are situated in the discussed socio-economic situations, as distinguished from the unsuccessful trends to harness also these activities to the framework of the market and to the hands of the capital owners.
Hayek and the planned intervention in the economy.
There is no doubt that Hayek is among the first harbingers of the neoliberal era, and seemingly he is first and foremost among the opponents of a proposal of the type brought in this work, whose meaning for him is the imposition of an additional task upon the state concerning the orders of the liberal democratic regime, which are necessarily also economic, and creates an additional and more extensive intervention in the economy's operation. Compared to the general theory, behold The Road to Serfdom, which was written in 1944 toward the end of the Second World War, looks toward the future of the West after the war and the approaching victory of capitalist America over fascist and Nazi totalitarianism. And indeed, the book is dedicated not a little to the connection between the totalitarian regimes in their origins and socialism, its ideas, and its practical proposals for the individual's physical security at the expense of his liberty. The core of Hayek's criticism in the issue of state intervention stems from the vital necessity, not only for reasons of efficiency that prove themselves as they are in the spontaneous action of the economy without planned intervention, but also because of the fear, also proven, that state intervention requires planning determined by a few, according to criteria that cannot be predicted in advance of distribution, according to more justice and more equality, as distinguished from absolute justice, which is a clear distribution criterion and which is not on the agenda. The meaning of determining rules of this type by a few invites not only errors because of the limited knowledge of those few, as opposed to the spontaneity of the aggregate of the individual's decisions, who know accurately the data standing before them on the individual level, but it also invites that which every collectivism and over-concentration of power invites, namely corruption and a walk toward totalitarianism. However, a careful examination of Hayek's theory reveals that to much surprise, there is not to be found in his arguments, as distinguished from the basis of his arguments, any contradiction to the idea of the fourth branch as it is, since the basis of his arguments against state intervention does not fit the conceptual practical basis of the fourth branch from the aspects of the central planning of the intervening state. First, it is worthy to note that Hayek recognizes in his work from 1944 the severe problems of capitalist society in their fullness, as well as the vital need to attend to their solution without harming the market's freedom, competition, and free initiative. According to his own method, the debate with the socialists is not about the goal, namely, social justice in the sense of more equality and security for the individual, but mainly about the means, which is necessarily according to the socialist system. Central planning instead of the private entrepreneur acting for the sake of profit. The question, according to Hayek, is therefore not seemingly whether social justice should be reached, but whether this matter will be done through granting the knowledge and initiative in the hands of whoever has the power of coercion at his disposal, over the creation of conditions which will provide to the individuals, the units, the knowledge and initiative in the best space of action, so that they can plan and perform their wishes in the most successful way. At this point, Hayek explicitly notes that one should not mix between opposition to this type of planning and a dogmatic stand on economic freedom. The liberal argument favors the best possible use of the forces of competition as a means for coordinating the efforts of humans, not the avoidance of every change and movement. It is based on the recognition that where it is possible to create real competition, it will be a better way than any other for the guidance of the individual's efforts.
Hayek does not deny, but even emphasizes that for the competition to be blessed, there is a need for a legal framework that was prepared with care, and that the legal rules of the present and of the past alike shall be free from severe defects. He does not deny that in a place where it is impossible to create the conditions necessary for real competition, we must take other ways for the guidance of economic activity. The successful use of competition as a principle of the society's organization excludes certain types of coercive intervention in economic life, but it recognizes other types which sometimes may assist to a very significant extent in their action, and they even necessitate certain types of governmental action. Here, Hayek is required for the first axiom of free competition, and it is equality of opportunity and free competition. It is necessary that all parties in the market be free to sell and to buy, and that every person be permitted to produce, sell, and buy. And it is a necessity that entry to the various branches be open to all under conditions of equality, without any restriction of individuals or groups by overt or available force. Indeed, Hayek recognizes that mere formal conditions of justice and formal equality before the law are not sufficient, but there is a need for substantive conditions for real free competition. Therefore, it is not enough in his own method in legal protection of the private, existing, and freedom of contract, but it is a duty to define them in a manner enabling competition and efficiency. However, equality from the aspect of distributive justice is not acceptable to him for the reason that it is not possible at all. According to his method, the choice before us is not between one system in which a person will receive all that is coming to him according to some universal yardstick of justice, and between a system in which the individual's lot is determined in part by chance or luck, but between a system in which the will of a few is that which decides who will win what, and between a system in which the matter depends at least partially on the talent and initiative of those concerned. להלן תרגום חלק זה מתוך עבודתו של דוקטור אלון גלעדי לאנגלית, מילה במילה ובהתאם להנחיותיך. Again and again, it can be seen that this analysis of Hayek does not concern the fourth branch, but perhaps the welfare state of the planning type, which intervenes in a centralized manner in the economy's activity. His arguments concentrate on the planning character, on an extreme option opposite to the liberal way, and not on real middle possibilities. Furthermore, from the negative, you hear the positive. If it were possible to create a mechanism through which it would be possible to act for a just distribution of resources and to avoid the disagreements and dominance of strong groups against weak ones, etc., Hayek would not have a real conceptual ground to oppose a new arrangement of this type for society, especially when the matter enables more and more people to enter a competition of equal opportunities. Hayek explicitly notes that the capitalist society does not enable equal chances for competition, since it necessarily bases itself on private property, as well as on inheritance, including the differences in chances that they create. Not only this, but according to his method, indeed, there is room to argue strongly for the right of the reduction of this inequality in chances, as much as the innate differences permit it, and as much as it is possible to do so without destroying the non-personal character of the process, in which every man must take upon himself the risk, and no man's opinion regarding the just and the desirable overrides the opinion of others. Although within the framework of competition, a man who is poor at the beginning of his path has much smaller chances to reach immense wealth than the chances of a man who received property by inheritance. Behold, it is not enough that the matter is possible for the first, but the competitive regime is the only one in which the matter depends only on the poor man himself and not on the mercies of those possessing power. Hayek's argument indeed fits his logic, according to which there is no middle way, but only extreme ways, namely centralized planning versus a free market. But can one seriously agree to the claim according to which the poor man is not limited by those possessing power, alongside the contradictory argument of Hayek himself that his chances are much less against the chances of the rich man? Can the possibility, as well as the search for a middle way, another way which will enable free economic activity together with the outlining of minimum conditions for living with dignity, and the narrowing of gaps which will enable a true and equal opportunity for competition in that same free economy, be dismissed with a wave of the hand? Or perhaps we must settle for a free economy for all from a formal perspective, but free for a very few from a substantive perspective. I cannot accept Hayek's argument that on the one hand, the middle way is the most logical solution to the contradictions situated within the neoliberal system, as well as the centralized planning one, but on the other hand, that only one of the extreme ways can be established, and all this without a real explanation, all the more so an attempt to examine a practical institutional solution to that logical solution. At first it seems that there is nothing more plausible or more likely to appeal to reasonable people than the idea that our goal must be neither the extreme decentralization of free competition, nor the complete concentration of a single plan, but some thoughtful mix of the two ways. And yet it turns out that in practice, common sense as such is not to be relied upon. Although competition can bear some mixture of regulation, we will not be able to combine it with planning, as much as we wish, without it ceasing to act as an actual guide to production. Planning is also not a cure that, if we require it in small doses, can bring the results we might hope for if we use it fundamentally. Both competition and central direction become miserable and inefficient tools if they are not complete. These are alternative principles coming to solve the same problem itself, and the mixture of the two means that neither of them will truly succeed, and the result will be worse than if they had consistently relied on one of the two systems. In other words, it is possible to combine planning and competition only by planning for competition, but not by planning against competition. Hayek's proposal is therefore that planning is possible by a few, but this in order to preserve that same extreme method that he chose, or someone chose, and which in a built-in manner lacks equal opportunity, invites severe social gaps, and acts mainly for the benefit of those possessing power. This concerns, of course, an internal contradiction which the fourth branch seeks to solve.
That same mix, that same middle way between the methods, which will promote society toward a solution to the question of social justice, equality of opportunity, the living conditions worthy of all of society's citizens, is situated not in planning, but also in competition between the branches, combined with the action of the free market. Every extreme way will necessarily lead society to serfdom, whether it is from the neoliberal direction or from the opposite direction. What does it matter to me if this serfdom originates in the power to corrupt from the school of the centralized planning authority officials, or in the action of the barons of civil society, in whose hands most of the means of production and influence are concentrated? Furthermore, the end of every extreme solution, which lacks mechanisms that are regulated and adjusted to a changing reality, toward balance and checking of accumulated power centers, is to consume itself. If, according to Hayek's position, we are likely to find ourselves, because of the centralizing planning, in a state of increasing tendency toward centralization of power and totalitarianism, behold the shedding of the state's traditional roles and their transfer to civil society, which is, in an increasingly intensifying manner, centralizing between a limited number of capital barons, is likely to lead to that same process from a different direction. Not only this, but the shedding of the state's social roles is likely to continue also toward its traditional liberal roles from the fields of violence, for the simple reason that the accumulation of power invites the accumulation of more power, whether it concerns the heads of the state or whether it concerns the heads of civil society. The privatization of prisons, the army, etc., due to the increasing need of the influential to accumulate more and more power, their end is to bring us to a state of a broken trough in which it is not enough that there is no substantive equality in the free state, but there is also a state of lack of freedom for most citizens in a state of lack of state.
Hayek and the built-in elitism in negative liberty.
Hayek's early criticism regarding state intervention focuses, therefore, on the issue of centralized planning of economic activity, which is identified by him not only with inefficiency in general, and particularly in comparison to the efficiency of the spontaneous market, but also, and perhaps mainly, with a real danger to liberty. It appears, therefore, that with the falling of the implications of his argument regarding planned intervention for the matter of the fourth authority, our discussion in this regard is complete and concluded. However, Hayek, apparently, was aware of the basic flaws in his early proposal, for even if you give the individuals full information through an impersonal system like the price system, there still will not be a proper competition that will lead the entire society forward, if those individuals do not possess minimum means for the purpose of competition. Furthermore, the problem of generations only worsens this matter. Liberty cannot be realized without minimum conditions for its existence, and the spontaneous order will remain in this state on the shelf. Here, I seek to attend briefly to Hayek's later argument against positive liberty and against implications from aspects of justice for the question of equal opportunity and issues of social justice, which is also relevant to the matter of the fourth authority and its purpose. Hayek seeks to characterize his criticism of the various trends away from the liberal path of his time by attributing them to the level already noted by Popper, namely, from Plato to Hegel and Marx. Namely, that collectivism supports in all its forms the rejection of the individual's liberty by transferring the individual's fate, his physical security, to the hands of the few, experts, wise men, those raised above the people. Of those few who remove from him the responsibility, the thought, and the liberty, and outline his life in their professional way. This is that same philosophical, intellectual elite which is itself a cover for the regime of the few over the many on the way to totalitarianism. But a careful examination of Hayek's arguments reveals that beyond the trends he identifies in Keynes's proposals in the professional, forceful direction, behold, regarding his practical proposals, as far as they concern the specific field of the fight against unemployment or the increasing of investments, for example, by the action of the central bank, he has no real dispute with Keynes, as long as this action does not cancel the action of the free market. Planning, as we saw above, is permitted, as long as it is for the purpose of maintaining the conditions of free competition, and not against it. The built-in problem of the liberal society in its increasing gaps has in it not only to lead to the issue of economic gaps as such, but also to the creation of a general social educational elite, which seeks by the nature of things to preserve its power and to intensify it. The expanding gaps force the lower classes to fight for their survival, and do not allow them to dedicate free time as well as resources to autonomous self-action. But what is the meaning of this assumption, if not expanding gaps also in the possibility for better health, for communal political activity, and even for possibilities for free education and free influence because of it? The economic professional schools, the professional intersections of influence, whether in the public sector or in the private sector in the neoliberal society, are not generally open to approaches fundamentally different from the neoliberal approach, since those who see education as a livelihood are subject to a vicious circle of the desire to reach the intersections of influence and livelihood, which are involved in belonging to the wings of the capital owners. From here also that the existing system, and thus the theories that they learn and teach, as well as their way of action upon reaching the centers of influence, whether in civil society or in the public society, are situated in a danger of constant dogmatism. Specifically, the extreme method which Hayek preaches, as well as the opposite method, have in them the capacity to cause the creation and preservation of an elite of capital owners or other, as well as the aspiration to enter that same elite, and thereby lead to the creation of an elite of professionals whose trend is monotonous, dogmatic, and dependent on that same money to whose courts they naturally aspire to come. Hayek's criticism against the idea of social justice, including the matter of equality of opportunity, is not a direct criticism against the very importance of this idea to society, but an indirect criticism, seemingly practical, namely, against the ability to realize it while preserving the free image of Western democracy. To this practical dimension, Hayek seeks to add also a seemingly moral dimension, when he argues that injustice occurs only when one man deliberately intervenes in another's life without that other's consent. Since the distribution of income and welfare by the market is a result of the action of millions of individuals acting with an intention of personal success, behold, in a place where the market acts in a manner enabling free activity and prevents the individual from performing coercive actions, it is not possible that the result of the distribution will be unjust, however hard and destructive it may be for particular individuals and groups, since it is a result of non-deliberate acts. The basis of the justification of distribution by the market, according to Hayek, is also connected with his spontaneous theory, namely, that the individuals act in a liberty which is in its basis negative. This is liberty from the coercion of another to do an act that I would have done differently. The fact that I lack the resources to perform an action, that if I had them I would do it, is not coercion unless these resources were taken from me deliberately by another. This position of Hayek develops itself on its bases, and according to it, the neoliberal project is planned to allow a relative gap between poor and rich to grow, if this is what free exchange in the market leads to, on the claim that the condition of those who have less will be improved in absolute terms by the market. Thus, the growing gaps cannot be controlled on a basis of social justice. But again, it concerns a circular argument. For free exchange is not possible in the absence of conditions of equality of opportunity from the start for individuals. Certainly the growing gap in a given cake, which does not necessarily grow with time, and perhaps the opposite, necessarily causes a competition that is clearly not free. The fourth authority, whose action and authority are directed toward balancing society from the positive direction of liberty, an act which will be determined through competition between the branches, and not through the determination of a centralized planning body, is at least theoretically a response to the majority of Hayek's conceptual claims. Its status as an elected and legislative body, as one has in it the capacity to change this trend of the connection between capital and government, between capital and general education, dogmatic and one way in the field of political economy. The social legitimacy that will be created from the change of the branch toward a struggle for true and worthy minimum conditions, for true equal opportunity, as well as for efficiency and free competition,
from the direction of the existing executive authority will cause beyond a substantive social change, also a need for the action of a professional rank possessing freer and less dogmatic opinions than those envisioned at the intersections of influence of our days. This trend is likely to fertilize and promote the intellectual openness which is so necessary for the progress of society, both on the scientific, technological plane and on the moral, social plane.